The least American of U.S. aircraft carriers to serve in the United States Navy during World War II was a ship that technically never existed. The USS Robin, while commanded by the United States, was crewed with British sailors. In fact, the ship wasn't a U.S. vessel at all, and was actually the British HMS Victorious, plus an array of American naval gadgets in disguise. Negotiated at the highest level, the British carrier's loan was one of the most valuable and unusual components of the American-British partnership in the Pacific Theater. The HMS Victorious was requested by the 1936 naval program under the Royal Navy. It was the third aircraft carrier out of 4 within the illustrious class. These carriers were some of the most prominent British warships during World War II. Design and development began in the late 1930s, in response to the increasing threats of military development in Germany's Third Reich, Fascist Italy, and Japan. The HMS Victorious project was laid down in 1937 at Newcastle-on-Tyne and built at the Vickers Armstrong shipyard. The ship was launched in 1939. It had been hastily commissioned in 1941 for service in the Battle of the Atlantic as an escorting ship. The illustrious class of vessels was designed within the limitations of the Second London Naval Treaty, limiting their size to 23,000 tons at most. These ships relied on their armored flight deck and anti-aircraft armament for protection. Two weeks after being commissioned, the HMS Victorious was sent to the North Atlantic as part of the squad hunting down the Bismarck German battleship. However, the vessel was hardly prepared for the intense chase, as it only carried a quarter of its aircraft complement. Pursuing the German warship, the HMS Victorious launched 9 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers and 2 Fulmar fighters on May 24, 1941. They attacked the Bismarck, receiving back heavy anti-aircraft fire. Still, none of the planes were lost during the encounter, and one of the Swordfish scored a hit to the ship's armored belt. Upon their return, the homing beacon on the Victorious failed. The 2 Fulmars had to be ditched at sea when they ran out of fuel. After that, HMS Victorious was withdrawn from the chase. 3 days later, the Bismarck would sink, thanks to the destruction of its steering gear by planes from HMS Ark Royal. In June, HMS Victorious was escorting troop convoy WS-8X when one of its Swordfish planes from the 825th Naval Air Squadron spotted the Gunzenheim, a German supply vessel north of the Azores archipelago. Several Hawker Hurricane planes were sent to reinforce the British Mediterranean base in Malta as part of Operation Tracer. The Gunzenheim was successfully attacked, and by the time the British carrier returned to the naval base in Scapa Flow, several prisoners were kept on board. The carrier was sent at the end of the following month to Murmansk, escorting the HMS Adventure and its cache of mines. Before July was over, the vessel took part in the raid of Kirkenes and Patsamo, to which it lost 13 planes. During September, it was sent on bombing missions against Norway and Sweden. In October, HMS Victorious was sent along with the home fleet to intercept the German warships Tirpitz and Scheer, both sailing in the Atlantic. The location of the ships was discovered thanks to the decryption of the Enigma code the Germans were using. The United States also contributed to this operation, a partnership that predated America's formal declaration of war against Germany. The North Atlantic counter-operation continued until the end of 1941, when Hitler canceled his attack. The British carrier continued with the home fleet until March of the following year. HMS Victorious went to the Arctic as an escort for convoys going between Western Europe and the Soviet Union in March and April of 1942. While traveling, some of its aircraft attempted to bomb the German Tirpitz, and 2 planes were lost. After the mission, the British carrier returned to base in Scapa Flow. The beginning of American involvement in World War II was rough. The battles of Midway, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz Islands, as well as the campaign in Guadalcanal, were stretching and weakening the U.S. Navy fleet. Carrier presence in the Pacific was particularly stretched thin. 4 American carriers had been lost by September 1942. Barely operational, the USS Enterprise had suffered significant damage near Guadalcanal, and the USS Saratoga had been hit in the Solomon Islands. Furthermore, the USS Ranger carrier, which took part in Operation Torch, landing troops in North Africa, was not deemed suitable for the Pacific Front. The U.S. Navy could not supplement its fleet with new ships, as the upcoming Essex class still needed development and time for assembly. To counter the Imperial Japanese Navy, the U.S. needed additional carriers, especially considering their already planned offensive on the Solomon Islands chain. Immediately after the Battle of Midway, the U.S. asked for assistance from the British Admiralty, but the Royal Navy was fighting the Germans in the Mediterranean and Atlantic at the time. Later on, the British were approached once again. This time, conversations were held directly between Prime Minister Churchill and President Roosevelt. The supposed USS Robin was the answer to America's complicated position. The Royal Navy leased the HMS Victorious carrier to the United States for use in the war after the difficult battles of 1942 and 43. The United States needed every possible carrier, as expressed by Francis Pike in his comprehensive history book, Hirohito's War, quote, "Aircraft carriers had arrived at the point of technological development that they gave a range extension option that was not available to a battleship fleet." Japan wanted to fight the U.S. Pacific Navy with all its force, as the Axis powers had more carriers, higher quality aircraft, and highly trained pilots. The U.S. had much to worry about in addition to the 1942-43 low point. For morale reasons, it also needed to aggressively combat the Japanese, since their fleet was still going strong a year after Pearl Harbor. Early small gains were starting to surge in Guadalcanal, where Americans were successfully expelling the Japanese. However, if the Japanese had launched a new carrier assault, it could have reversed the situation. Communications between the United States Navy and the Royal Navy went all the way up in the chain of command, and ended up in an agreement. The Royal Navy detached its HMS Victorious carrier from its home fleet, despite increasing operational commitments to the United Kingdom. The vessel was replenished in Scotland, and then sent to Bermuda on December the 20th. The carrier entered American control at Norfolk Naval Shipyard in January 1943, where it underwent intensive modifications. In January, the HMS Victorious stayed dry docked at Norfolk, where it was transformed into the USS Robin. The ship had the talk between ships communication system installed, received new surface and air radars, got 2 Cypher machines, and got the YB aircraft homing system. As part of the final touches, the stern was extended by a 10-foot deck with an underlying gallery for 20 20mm aircraft guns. In the crew area, the ship saw the installation of a fire suppression system, and the hangar deck received a new control station. For its aircraft, the obsolete Fairey Albacore torpedo bombers were changed for General Motors TBM Avengers. These massive planes required new and stronger arrestor cables. All the aircraft were registered as American, adding the U.S. insignia. An American naval aviation team was sent to train their British counterparts on American call signs and practices. The United States even provided the Royal Navy crew with the U.S. Navy uniforms for the tropics. The USS Robin was briefly docked at Pearl Harbor for more modifications. 2 more arrestor wires were added to effectively hold the new aircraft. The existing arrestor hooks were modified as well, and more anti-aircraft guns were added to the ship. Color-wise, the vessel's Royal Navy camouflage was replaced with the U.S. Navy blue to match the USS Saratoga's. On May the 8th, the HMS Victorious left Pearl Harbor towards the South Pacific. The vessel that arrived at the Solomon Islands to form part of Task Force 36 was officially the USS Robin. About the ship, Joseph Tremaine wrote in an article for Armchair General magazine that, quote, her ship's crew was British, but her aircrew and aircraft were American. No one involved had any illusions that she wouldn't be identified as the Victorious by enemy pilots, so she proudly flew her British Jack throughout her time with the Yanks, even when only the Yanks were flying on and off her flight deck. The leader of Task Force 36, Rear Admiral Forrest P. Sherman, sent the carriers at his disposal to New Georgia in the Solomon Islands on June the 27th to accomplish the invasion known as Operation Toenails. Task Force 36 didn't actually participate in the amphibious landings. Instead, the USS Robin and other carriers remained stationed for 28 days in total. Their goal was to provide air cover for the landing troops and their vehicles. To participate in the operation, the British crew of the USS Robin trained extensively on American procedures. During those 28 days, American and British sailors and pilots took turns patrolling the skies for 12 hours a day. The ships on standby did not see use on that occasion. The USS Robin and its crew made no contact with enemy troops or aircraft. Task Force 36 went back to Noumea on July the 25th, while the operation was still ongoing. At the end of July 1944, the USS Robin was finally detached from the United States Navy and allowed to go home after having all the U.S. Navy gear removed at Pearl Harbor. Removals included the radar, communications tools, and flight gear. After being refitted in Liverpool, the HMS Victorious returned to the Pacific at the beginning of 1945. It participated in the invasion of Okinawa, known as Operation Iceberg. On May the 9th, while near Okinawa, 2 kamikaze aircraft struck the vessel and damaged its armored flight deck. The crew quickly put out the fire, and the ship continued flight operations just a couple of hours later. HMS Victorious remained in active service after the end of the Second World War. It was modernized during the 1950s with a new angled flight deck and intense modifications. The vessel was finally removed from service due to an extensive onboard fire in 1967. The ship was broken up in 1969 at Faslin Naval Base.